And this idea that, you're different than me, you're worse than me, you're trying to hurt people while I'm trying to help people, start to see like, no, that's not true, because it can't be true. And if we could see that, I think we'd get to what we call a better world. Not that it's broken in the first place, but we're all trying to get to this better world by fixing the others, all those evil people on Wall Street who make so much money and they don't share it, and all those racists and all those, people who start wars. And we gotta make sure that they don't do that anymore. We gotta fix their behavior, instead of seeing that we could move mountains by seeing that they're not their behavior. And we can see that most effectively by looking at ourselves and getting to a place of seeing that we are not our behavior individually. I'm not the product of the things that I do or don't do. Right? I've done some, crappy things in my life, but they're not me. And all of the beautiful, kind, helpful, loving, generous things that I've done in my life are also not me. They're just activities. They're just activities. And all of the things that I hold some guilt about, that has nothing to do with me either. And there's nothing to be guilty for. There's nothing to be guilty for, because we didn't make this. This is a very, a very new Western, I don't even know, it doesn't really matter, but it's a concept that like, oh, you're responsible for all of your behaviors. And if you do something wrong, you should sit on that and feel it forever. But you can't get it wrong. You can't get it wrong. And if people could see that and just and be not get to us, I was going to say get to a state of more inner peace. That's still somewhere to get to. I just mean be right now in the feeling of, oh, I'm okay. Everything is okay. No matter what I've done in the past. Past doesn't really exist except in my memory. Even if I hurt somebody, I killed somebody, it still only exists through memory. And we can be okay with who we are. I mean, to me, that's what's going to, make a kinder, better world.
The following is a conversation with Naphtali Visser. He's a coach, a friend, and a personal mentor of mine. He's also the author of the book Humans Working: Why Culture and Mindset Beat Strategy. Nav is a person I turn to if I had an existential crisis, and that happened somewhat frequently in the last few years, and our conversations are responsible for bringing a lot of happiness into my life. My hope is that this conversation can bring some happiness into your life as well. This podcast can be easily misinterpreted by looking at the sound bites instead of the wider context of what is being spoken. My suggestion is to keep the wider context top of mind, as a means to truly understand. In many of my past conversations with Naphtali, I found that it often takes me a few times to truly get to the core of what he's saying. Similarly, throughout the podcast, we speak at a fairly deep level. And therefore, I suggest that if you can't understand what is being spoken at first glimpse, you allow some further examination to happen within the background of your own mind, as that may bear surprises for you, as it often did for me. Without any further ado, enjoy this conversation with Naphtali Visser. Mr. Naphtali, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
Should be fun.
The way that we met was quite interesting to me. At the time I was selling a YouTube course. I was trying to get you as my client. I was trying to pitch you on a call. I'm not a really good salesperson. And so I got really engaged by the conversation that we were having. We found some common ground regarding principles of coaching and spirituality and things like that. And then we developed what I would call a beautiful friendship.
Yeah.
And also, I would say within our relationship, there are traits of mentorship. It happened quite often that I came to you for advice. What do you recall of that conversation? Almost like
the
2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
So I reached out to you just because I thought there was something a little different about you. I realized you were selling something because we were in the same, we'd taken a marketing course online together. So we were in the same Facebook group. And it was a while ago now, probably 5 years, so I don't remember exactly, but there was just something sort of compelling about you. So I reached out and asked if you wanted to have a chat. And I wouldn't say you were not a good salesperson at all. I was actually seriously considering buying what you were offering. I had just paid for that other course, which was pretty expensive. But as you mentioned, it just sort of, our conversation sort of wandered to somewhere more natural. I think it became obvious that it was more important to pursue that avenue than making a little quick cash. Not that they couldn't exist, together, but
One of the things that I think would resonate a lot is our perspectives around coaching. What would you say makes our common view around coaching different compared to what you see other coaches are doing?
that's a big old fat question. Yeah, it's a funny question. And I think, if you had asked me a month ago even, I'd probably have a different answer. My coaching, if you will, is leaning more towards, well, it's always been towards seeing what's real, I guess is kind of how I've put it, as opposed to how to get more stuff done. And really in the past month or so, I've just been thinking about that a lot more, right? Like what's really real spiritually, if you will. It turns out that as people generally see, how the system really works, whether that's spiritual or psychological or whatever, however you want to put it, as they see how it really works, it becomes more and more obvious that there's less to do in this life, even to achieve things. So people generally find that they find more happiness in their work. They're able to be more productive in their work. They're able to be more productive, happy, interactive, and so forth in their family life. And of course, from that, they make some more money. They have better relationships and stuff like that. I generally don't talk about how to fix a relationship or what to do in a relationship or how to make more money or how to be more productive, how to get more done, how to find your purpose, like all of that stuff. I don't generally talk about it. But one of the things in the past couple months that I've been studying / focusing on is the idea that there really kind of is no separation. The way that you framed the question, which is completely normal, of course, is, like the difference between how we do things versus others. And I've just been trying to see that there is no other. I don't mean that in like a new agey way, like, well, we're all the same. I mean, like everything is the same. Like you and me and an animal and a planet and God and light and it's all just one thing. The idea of non-duality, right? There isn't, and we can get a little deeper into this or not, but maybe I don't want to because it can just go off the rails pretty quick. But I've just been seeing for myself that everything is one, and any separation that exists only exists in our mind.
I find your perspective over trying to look for what's real something that is possibly the most important thing within any coaching endeavor, something that I had never seen within any other coach. Therefore, halfway jokingly, I ask you the question, why not focus on techniques, or why not focus on reading books, or why not focus on methods or commitment or other, would say, mainstream coaching advice?
Look, I could say like, well, because all that's really real in this world is blah, 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 and that's what we need to focus on. And maybe there's some truth to that, but I mean, the answer to your question really is because I find it a whole lot easier and more fun to talk about the nature of life and the nature of the universe, and to like go explore. I find it more interesting to go out in the forest and see all that's there, as opposed to going to a museum and like learning about a particular type of tree, or learning, how to plant a tree or something like that. It's more immersive. It's more real, if you want, to just sort of be in it. And we all have our dynamic lives, our families and our jobs, all that. But to think that is what life is to miss out on a whole bunch, right? So I feel like a lot of humans, and certainly myself included at times, and certainly a lot of coaches, are pushing to achieve more, particularly in the areas of like financial / career success. so that, we can experience more of life. Like, wouldn't it be nice to go on these kinds of vacations and send your kid to private school and blah, blah, blah. And, because then, and then your kid, and then you'll have this, and then you'll have that, and then and I'm just trying to say, like, well, what do you have right now? Not in your bank account, not in, in your resume and all that kind of stuff, but what do you have right now? And you have like this infinite pool of everything. We literally have everything right now. Happiness is such a loaded word, right? But when you start to see that happiness is not dependent on anything else around you, your relationships or your money or anything else, you really can just be happy because it's sort of our natural state. Well, once you kind of get that, you stop looking for substitutes. You stop seeking out alcohol or food as a emotional replacement. You stop seeking out those like high intensity relationships that are like crazy, that fill you with such, great feelings for a few months and then generally don't go well after that. You stop seeking money. You know enough to support yourself and all that stuff, but you don't seek it as like, oh, once I get there, wherever there is, then I'll be okay. You start to see that life is taking care of life. Life has always been taking care of life for you and everybody else on the planet, and you stop chasing things. And there's something in there. I don't want to go too long on this one question, but I said life is taking care of life for everybody on the planet, and I know some people might object to that. Let's put that on the side for a second, and maybe we'll come back to that.
One of the things that I've struggled the most in the past, I would say I still do to a certain degree today, although significantly less, is the idea of chasing something. Because in my hyper-productive, hyper-competitive mind, or whatever label as that, I always came from the perspective of, if I'm not doing something that's productive at any second of every day, I am losing out, and I'm a loser, and I am not going to get to my goals, and I'm always going to remain just one of many average. And this has been the topic of many of our conversations, this idea of chasing. And I would say throughout our conversations, I've learned a lot regarding the subject. And although I am still very much someone that manages to be productive, and although I'm still very much someone that manages to get stuff done, a lot of that frenetic energy has been left behind.
Yeah, so is it okay if I respond to that?
You go for it.
So if we bring this conversation back to earth from where I was, speaking, and we talk about just productivity, right? The whole idea of productivity, the whole idea of anything is, like Kermit says, somebody thought of that and someone believed it. It's not a thing. Productivity is not a thing. And that's the problem. We take any concept and then we thingify it, right? And we have this idea of productivity now. And in my mind, you could say productivity is just a really simple equation. It's like, the result divided by the amount of effort it took you to get there, right? So if you, wrote an email to somebody and then they sent you $1 million, I would say that was a very productive email, right? A very productive 10 minutes. Even though, you may not have hit your KPIs of how many calls you were supposed to make and the percentage of yeses and how many minutes each call lasted and all these other measurements that we come up with for anything, right? How many hours you sleep, your nutrition, your blah, 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 blah. And it seems to me that the people that are like very productive like that are ones that aren't like going crazy all the time. Like artists are a really good example of that, right? Like a musician that has sort of a dream or a vision of a song and then writes it down and then publishes it. Like the song Yesterday by the Beatles. That was just like a dream that Paul McCartney had. He woke up and wrote it down, and like that song has been very, very good to him. Or artists similarly that have an idea and paint a painting from not necessarily a place of beauty, but sometimes a place of really darkness, but still it comes from inspiration, which means spirit within blossoming. Something formless turning into form, turning into an idea, which is form, and then turning into a painting or whatever. And, the same could be for business. I mean, I've definitely heard of people having a great idea on an airplane, when they were shut off from their computer or whatever, and that turned into a great business. Still the business to start the business or start the new division or whatever, it took the nitty gritty of calling people and all that. But the point is that those great ideas come from generally a place of quiet, of like connecting to spirit. Whether you believe in an idea of God or not, that you have to admit there's something in all of us, call it, that allows us to come up with great ideas, to solve problems that we've been thinking about for a long time, without trying to solve them, right? All of us have had that experience of taking a shower or something, and the idea or the solution to a problem we've been struggling with just sort of whacks us in the face. But all of this is sort of beyond, aside from the point. If we're still doing these things to get somewhere, right? To not see that wherever you're trying to get, you already are. Whoever you're trying to be, you already are. That's what I really want to point people towards. And then whatever happens on top of that, you become successful, you have a partner, you have kids, those are all just like part of humaning. Those are all just like things we do. And they can be fun, but they're activities. You wouldn't look at whatever happens on top of that. You become successful, you have a partner, you have kids, those are all just like part of humaning. Those are all just like things we do. And they can be fun, but they're activities. You wouldn't look at a child who goes to school and they went on the playground, or they did some art, or they did some whatever. You'd call that an activity. Oh, you had an activity for an hour. Isn't that nice? But if I have a child, it's the same thing. I did an activity for, the time span is different, but that's it. Oh, I had a job. I was the executive VP of nothingness at big old nothing company. Yeah, that was an activity. It's just all of us humaning. I had an argument with somebody, and it's an activity. So, but it's not the numbers that are in, in Syria or in Turkey or of a particular race or gender or this or that. And those people have it. They don't have it so good. And all of those things that those people or these people, you and me or somebody in Syria, we're all getting life right 100% of the time. And we all have the capacity to see light all of the time, to be light all of the time, right? And that's one of them, like, if we bring it back to Earth again, like one of the most inspirational things, some of the things that we find most inspirational as humans are those stories of like somebody who gets their legs blown off, and then not only do they find a way to not be bitter, but they find a way to run a marathon, or you hear stories of there were people in, concentration camps during the World War II that, found a way to find meaning. You hear of, like Nelson Mandela, was in prison for 27 years, came out, wasn't bitter. And not only wasn't bitter, but came out and refused to see this black and white thing in South Africa and united everybody, right? Those stories. So instead of saying like, oh, well, you could very easily look at a situation like that now through the lens that many humans talk about things now and say like, oh, that situation, those people can't be happy because they have it so bad. And it's just not true. That's not to say that we can't have compassion when we see somebody that appears to be, going through a hard time. Of course we can. But to also see that they have the same capacity for happiness, lightheartedness, joy, productivity, etc., that you and I have. No more, no less. And, I can hear my voice right now, and this is my nature, I guess, to be a little serious. As a personality type, I've been, I've been relatively serious a lot of my life, but I've also been a goofball, and the more that I see how silly life is, really, how silly it is, all of this stuff that we think about as the world, particularly politics and so forth. I mean, I used to get very attached to politics and, my idea of what was right and wrong and which candidate was better and how we should treat people and social justice and all these sorts of ideas. But now I look at it like pure entertainment. Like you watch the news or you watch a political debate or whatever, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious, the stuff that people come up with to say. And it's hilarious that we think that there's a way that we could have a utopia, that any of us thinks that, right? That and how attached we are to those ideas, right? So if you ask, let's just say in America, somebody who's a liberal and a conservative, how would you structure the world so that it was great? It's a very open-ended question, right? You'd get two very different answers. There would be overlap, for sure, but you'd get two very different answers. Likely, the two people would be very attached to those answers and would be hard to see that there was any truth in the other person's answer. Even if you can assume that we're all very well-meaning and want to create a beautiful world, even if you assumed that, we'd still never get there because it's all made of thought. We all have ideas of comparison. This economy or whatever was better than this economy. This way to teach children is better than this way because this leads to these outcomes and this leads to those outcomes and these outcomes are better than those outcomes. And we spend our whole life comparing. And we have no basis for comparison, right? It's just here. So if we zoom out again to what's real, well, it's not like I know what's real, but at least I'm leaning towards seeing that this world that we created as people, certainly there's more than that. And again, I'm not trying to figure it out I could draw you a picture of it all. It's just that if you've seen that movie, the Truman Show, right? I don't know if you've seen that, but it's like Jim Carrey. He lives in this world. He lives in a world, in a town that has a lake that he's got a little rowboat that goes on the lake. But it turns out that the whole town is just a studio set. And people tune in every week to watch him live his life. And he's the only one that's not in on the joke. He thinks that he's just living life in this town. And there's other people there. But the other people in the town, I don't remember exactly. I think they're actors. But he's not. He just thinks he lives there. And then towards the end of the movie, spoiler alert, it's like a 30-year-old movie at this point, but he, by mistake, he trips over something and he rips a hole in the studio set. So he sees oh, there's something beyond here. This is not it. And that's, at this point in my journey and where I'm trying to point clients is that, right? Don't you want to know what's outside the studio? Or if there is something there? Or are you okay with just being in this studio set that we've created as humans very recently, by the way, right? This society that we live in now it's a product of this time. 50 years ago, it looked much different. 200 years ago, obviously, it looked incredibly different. But that's it. Do you want to see what's outside or do you not? And I really don't have judgment about it either, but that's how I know if somebody's a right match. They're like, no, just tell me how to make more money. I'm not really great at that. I don't really know. But for the people that do sign up, generally they tell me that after we work together, their life is a lot better. Sometimes they do make some more money or have better business successes. Sometimes their relationships get better. Sometimes they just realize that even if all of those things don't change, they just walk through life with, a little bit of a lighter step. Life doesn't seem so heavy. Doesn't seem like there's stuff to be fixed all the time. And still, I get caught up in it all the time. Humaning, as I call it, right? Just humaning. My wife was asking about, where we should send our daughter to school next year. She'll be, just in kindergarten. And instantly my mind goes to kind of pros and cons, right? Of oh, well, if she goes to this kind of school, then there's these pros and cons. If she goes here, it's another thing, and got to figure out which one's actually better. And now I'm good at catching myself in a few minutes, being like, what are you doing? It's impossible. You're just making up a story and then convincing yourself that somehow what I just came up with, my list of pros and cons, is actually a thing. It actually makes sense, but it doesn't. And I'm just getting much better at trusting life, and it's a really good feeling.
Sometimes for me, it feels like we're all in a state of hypnosis. I'll tell you an example. I was at the airport in Malaysia, and I was lining up for immigration. There was a long line of 50 to 100 people on one specific queue, and then there were 2 or 3 other, queues or specific corridors that you could have followed and that were open. Everyone in front of me was lining up behind the 50 to 100 people queue. But then if you actually looked at the signals, it said that you could have just lined up on queue number 2 or number 3, and it would have been the same. And so I was a little dumbfounded by that, but I ended up trying to go for queue number 2, where there were no people. And I found myself walking through the corridor, I suppose you could call it like that, and getting to immigration first before everyone else. Except that being an example of mimetic theory where everyone is just copying each other. I find that there is a lot of examples like that where there is all this outside input that we are exposed to. Go make money, go do this, go do that. This is the next moment, this next thing to do for you. And I get logically why that makes sense, because fundamentally it seems to me like that's necessary in order to have a functioning society and a functioning system. Yet I find very often myself, and I suppose I'm going to talk about myself, I see a struggle when it comes to being able to distinctively differentiate between what I would call shoulds, as in take care of your fundamental needs, and what I would call the art of living. And I suppose I want to draw all this back to that idea of hypnosis. What is that? Do you happen to know?
I'm not clear on what you're asking. What sort of hypnosis?
I'm not clear. I'm not clear on that either. I'm simply pointing at some things I'm seeing as I live life, and I realize there is something really strange about all of this. A lot of the humanity that is intrinsic within ourselves just gets lost on the rat race and on what feels to me like societal programming.
Of course. Then the idea, I forget the term that you used, but sort of like living a higher life, right? A more purposeful life or something like that. It's kind of like telling that Jim Carrey character in the movie, instead of just going to work every day, why don't you go volunteer at the soup kitchen on the set of the TV show, right? It's still all part of humaning and of, doing rather than being. And it's still chasing. Look, there's nothing wrong with any of this. There's nothing wrong with any of it at all. Nothing wrong with, just, being homeless and being a drug addict. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But can we see that all of that is just trying to do better humaning, as opposed to seeing more of what/who we really are? And what comes with seeing that? Who knows? But at least, is there a distinction of just trying to get/have/be a better human versus experiencing what life really is? And you mentioned, excuse me, society, but the society of today is completely different than the society of, let's say, your parents had. They had jobs, and there was much less of a threat, like I have to save this much money or do this, achieve this. There was just more of a sense that all right, life is happening and things sort of take care of themselves, and people went to college and people had food and stuff like that. And 100 years ago was much different, and 300 years ago it was much, 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 much different. We had more more of an agrarian society and stuff like that. There was money of some sort, there was exchange, there was barter, but that wasn't life. I'm not saying that was better. I'm just saying that these ideas of what's a society, well, we tend to think of those things in very, 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 very short windows, right? Or maybe think of our generation and the past generation. My point is that all of this, it's just thought. It's everything that exists in the world of form just comes from thought. Here's an analogy that I like to use a lot. What one cell, one human cell, when fertilized, has all of the information in it to know how to make a baby. So one cell has the, call it intelligence, to turn into a baby. It knows when to replicate, how many times to replicate in order to make a heart, in order to make eyes, in order to start that heart beating, in order to make really chubby baby thighs. A very high percentage of the time, you get a very, very, very high functioning, beautiful baby. And then that baby, with some protection, but not a whole lot more than that, and some care and feeding, learns how to cry, learns how to poop. Not learns, but sort of it's in the system already. But then they do learn how to crawl and learn how to walk on their own, right? Nobody has ever said to a baby, all right, put one foot in front of the other, and then the baby falls down, and you say, oh, no, you leaned your weight too far to the left that time. Next time, lean a little bit more to the right. No, babies figure that out all by themselves. They stand up, they fall down, they stand up, they fall down, they stand up, they fall down. And it doesn't bother them. And then they learn about, maybe how to make friends. Maybe they learn some things about academics, and they learn, about maybe romantic relationships, and maybe they learn some sports, but all of these things just sort of come. They're just part of life coming at them, right? And how do you learn about a relationship? Let's just say like a romantic relationship as a 15-year-old, very clumsily, right? Very clumsily. Yes. But it's beautiful in a way. It's really beautiful to, as somebody who's had a lot of relationships or been married a long time or whatever, and you watch a 15-year-old get their heart broken, or trying to figure out how to ask somebody out on a date. It's hilarious to watch. But you realize also, like, oh, how beautiful is it that like the system is wired to do that already, right? The system is, and then they become, let's say, 18, and we'd like drop them out a window, and you're like, yeah, you're on your own now. But where that intelligence that was in that cell, it's still there, right? Then they learn how to live on their own, go to college, more, probably more advanced relationships, how to study, how to, maybe manage some finances, and all of these things come together relatively naturally. Yes, surely some of your programming, call it how your parents did these things, comes into play, but there's an awful lot of intelligence in the system. And then as you graduate from college and you get a job and you learn about corporate America or whatever other BS you learn about, and you learn about getting divorced, and you learn about, politics and the world. And I use the word learn a lot here, but I'm saying it's more like you just are being immersed in different, it's not like you study it. It's just like you get immersed in different knowledge pools, if you will, or more different experience pools, right? Like, well, I'm going to dunk you in the relationship pool now. I'm going to dunk you in the breakup pool now. We're going to dunk you in the, get a job pool now. But you just learn these things, and you realize pretty quickly, if you can, pretty quickly is the wrong term, because I'm just sort of starting to realize it, that life has always been taking care of life. That same cell that knew how to make a baby knows how to make a you. If there were to be a you, the idea that there is a Naph and there is an Elia is a bit of an idea too. We don't really exist. Like we're kind of characters in God's dream, if you like. But we don't have to go there right now. We can if you want to dive more into that. But even without that, assuming that we are all sort of people and we are beings, life is taking care of life. Life is taking care of life, and even death. is life taking care of life. A fish does not worry about its future. Even a chimpanzee, much closer to us than a fish, doesn't worry about what's it going to be when it grows up. Doesn't worry about like global warming. May have some experiences of the planet getting hotter or whatever, but doesn't create a world based on past, present, future, better, worse, comparison. And I know people have done studies about monkeys and other primates and shown that they enjoy status as well, stuff like that. But it's a much different type of thing that we live in, right? Where we spend our whole life trying to achieve status, basically, or trying to achieve, if it's not financial status or becoming president, it's spiritual status. I'm more at one with the world than you are, and I would love for you to know that. It's that sort of status, as opposed to really seeing for yourself that life is always taking care of life. There's not a lot to do.
There's one concept that you're just mentioning is responsible for a lot of happiness for me in the last few years. I'm not saying it's directly correlated to me listening to you saying that. I would say it's mainly correlated to me pondering this or similar statements and really trying to see what I make of it. At the time when we met, I was I was coming from a place and a time in which I was extremely stressed, and I was very much in a chasing mode. Around the time that we met and then after, I found myself getting a lot more peaceful and calm and significantly happier as well as a person, and definitely more loving and all these elements. Yet somehow I did not experience a productivity drop, which is funny to me because it's possibly one of my biggest fears. How do you talk to someone that is afraid of experiencing a productivity drop and yet can somewhat sense in some place deep within their hearts and can resonate with some of the words we're speaking?
Well, if they can resonate with it at all, they're 90% of the way there. It's like if you're in a dark cave, let's say somehow you've been caught in a dark cave somewhere, and there's no light coming into this cave at all, and one day there's like a little small earthquake and the ground shakes a little bit and just makes a crack in the cave that's like 1 centimeter wide, and light is coming through this crack. Well, man, there's like an infinite amount of more hope in that situation than there was before that. Now you know where to look, where to start digging. It might take you a while to get through it, but you know the direction to look. Doesn't matter that the whole thing hasn't crumbled yet. So that's what I'm trying to say about what the question you asked. If you can see it at all, you're golden. Just keep going in that direction. And yeah, you're going to keep forgetting and get turned around. And sure, I do it all the time. So what? At least I know where that crack in the wall is and I can go back there all the time. This is not the question you asked exactly, but you said, how do you talk to somebody who is, attached to this idea of productivity, for example? And I'd say, well, it's the same way that I'd talk to anybody, or you would talk to anybody, or anybody would talk to anybody who's afraid of the boogeyman. You have to show them at some level that like they made it up, but there is no boogeyman. So you made up the idea of productivity. You did, actually. I know it existed before you existed, but still you made it up. And so to see, you made up a concept and then ran with it and turned it into form, turned it into something. You took a thought, you did, which is like, let's say energy, which is still form. But an idea came to you of like, productivity, however you define it, spending more of the day on things that get me closer to my goals versus things that don't. And then instantly, like I said before, you thingified it. You turned it into stone. You turned it into like a real thing. And then you lived as if that thing was there. In the same way that we take a terrorist or, some being in a faraway land, the boogeyman, that guy over there who's dead set on, hurting Americans, or whatever they might say on the news. It's a boogeyman, but then we take that idea, we put them up on posters at the post office and other big posters and on the TV screen. And, this guy wants to take your family. And then we all live our lives as if that's true, but never realizing that that's all that happened. We drew a picture of a really scary dragon, and then we went to the store to buy a sword to kill that dragon we just drew a picture of. Instead of seeing, you could just flip the piece of paper over and draw a different picture of an angel or whatever, or you could just crumple it up and throw it away, or you could realize that the thing you wrote in was always in invisible ink anyway. It's not there. You made it up. Now look, do I do it? Yeah, because it's this thing we call being human. While it may be an illusion, it's a very convincing one. It's an incredibly convincing one. Einstein even has a quote about this, right? So this is not just like a woo-woo spiritual concept, right? He said, I don't know the exact quote. I can look it up if you really want, or you could, but it's something like, being a human, it's an illusion, and an incredibly persuasive one, but still an illusion. But even if it's not, why did any of us, at some point there weren't corporations, right? At some point there just weren't. And not long ago, maybe 100 years, 200 years, I don't even know, probably closer to 100 years. And then somebody had this idea, and now it's a thing. Now you need a corporation if you start a business. And there weren't lawyers, but now obviously that's a real thing. You really need a lawyer. And there weren't guns, but now we have to defend ourselves. And the whole society and all of life is based on a lot of these, frankly, insane ideas that were just ideas at some point. They were just somebody was sitting on a toilet somewhere at one point and thought of like, there's an interesting idea of guns. That was it. Somebody was sitting on the toilet and had this idea. And now we have a lot of guns, and we think that we need to, lock our doors and buy more guns and whatever to protect ourselves against all these other guns and everything. And everything is like that: money and business and even warm clothes and all of these ideas that we've come up with to protect ourselves from things that don't really exist, but only exist in thought. So I've gone off on a tangent there. Surprise, surprise. But feel free to ask me something else if you like, or say whatever you want. Look, I just want to say, now that we're laughing about this, like, most people are going to turn this conversation off now or an hour ago because it's wacky, right? When you're living in the world of I just got to get to work, or I just got to, and you hear somebody talk about, well, maybe we don't exist, or even about, well, maybe money is not that important, or maybe if that's like really far out of it'd be like a liberal turning on, Fox News and listening to it. And it's so far out of your worldview that it's hard to listen to. But I would just say if you can, you don't have to get all of it at once, because I certainly don't at all. Just start, like I said, just start poking at that studio set, like I referred to before from the movie, or the analogy I just gave of like that crack in the cave, right? Just start looking. You don't need to see it all at once. Just start looking a little bit. Maybe you get home and your partner yells at you or something. Just ask yourself, like, is this really as important as it seems right now? Is this really as horrible a situation as it seems right now? Or is there a part of me that's infusing that horribleness into it, right? Is there a part of me that, let's say your partner, you get home and your partner, you walk in the door, you've come home from work, a hard day at work, and you walk in the door and you open the door, and the first thing is, your partner says to you, where were you? You should have been home 20 minutes ago, And this actually happened with a client of mine, something very similar. And he tells me how upset he gets when his wife does this. And I asked him, can you please explain to me how sound waves can make you upset? Waves came out of your wife's mouth, and then they hit your eardrum, and then you turned those your brain, whatever, turned those sound waves into words, and then you assigned meaning to those words, right? Like she says, 20 minutes ago, you assigned what you had. First, you had to know what the word minute means. You had to know what 20 means. And then you assigned personal meaning to that. Like, well, I should have more freedom. I work really hard. All these shoulds. And then you got upset. So a whole bunch of things happened in between sound waves coming out of your wife's mouth and you getting upset. Most of them in you, but it looks like it's her. And we do that all the time, 24/7. It's always you. So what I'm saying is, am I expecting everybody to see that all the time? No. Including myself? No. But if you just see it once, a little bit, and this is a technique, right? This is not truth, but like if you just take 10 seconds, 2 seconds in between, hearing the yelling and reacting to it, there's this thing in business a lot. People say now, respond, don't react. But what if you could see there was nothing to respond nor react to? You made it up in the first place. You made up the idea that there's this object, this thing, this wife, this conversation, this voice, this argument, you made all that up anyway. There's nothing to respond or react to except what you made up in your head. So that part is true, but the technique part is like if you can take 5 seconds to just not open your mouth, generally what happens is compassion settles in and you're like, this is not the wife that I know, and you can say, are you all right? You seem a little off. And what might happen is she says, yeah, I had a hard day, this and that happened, and now World War III is averted. and you start to see that like, oh, there was nothing, even the story that you made up about her, being mean to you, you start to see like, oh, I made that up. She wasn't being mean. She was just at her limit, and it just came out in a weird way. Instead of making a thing out of like, why are you so mean to me? And then, you could respond instead of react, which is just like a kinder, gentler version of reacting, right? It's saying, you could say, why are you being so mean to me? Instead of, why are you being so mean to me? But why not just see that like, she's not, because she can't be, because you made it up. And even if the behavior is undesirable, it just came probably from a place of not malice, but of just not knowing, what else to do at the moment, just full. And then if you can see that, and we can zoom out a little bit and see that maybe like, your neighbors who are racist, maybe they're not really either. Maybe they're just kind of full up and they don't know where to take out a lot of their weird thinking. And we can zoom out a little bit more. We can zoom out a little bit more and zoom out a little bit more. And turns out, everybody's okay. Everybody's okay. And this idea that, you're different than me, you're worse than me, you're trying to hurt people while I'm trying to help people, start to see like, no, that's not true, because it can't be true. And if we could see that, I think we'd get to what we call a better world. Not that it's broken in the first place, but we're all trying to get to this better world by fixing the others, all those evil people on Wall Street who make so much money and they don't share it, and all those racists and all those, people who start wars. And we gotta make sure that they don't do that anymore. We gotta fix their behavior, instead of seeing that we could move mountains by seeing that they're not their behavior. And we can see that most effectively by looking at ourselves and getting to a place of seeing that we are not our behavior individually. I'm not the product of the things that I do or don't do. Right? I've done some, crappy things in my life, but they're not me. And all of the beautiful, kind, helpful, loving, generous things that I've done in my life are also not me. They're just activities. They're just activities. And all of the things that I hold some guilt about, that has nothing to do with me either. And there's nothing to be guilty for. There's nothing to be guilty for, because we didn't make this. This is a very, a very new Western, I don't even know, it doesn't really matter, but it's a concept that like, oh, you're responsible for all of your behaviors. And if you do something wrong, you should sit on that and feel it forever. But you can't get it wrong. You can't get it wrong. And if people could see that and just and be not get to I was going to say get to a state of more inner peace. That's still somewhere to get to. I just mean be right now in the feeling of, oh, I'm okay. Everything is okay. No matter what I've done in the past doesn't really exist except in my memory. Even if I hurt somebody, I killed somebody, it still only exists through memory. And we can be okay with who we are. I mean, to me, that's what's going to, make a kinder, better world, if you will. Not fixing other people. It will never work. It will never work to try to fix other people.
So this is one of the reasons why I love having conversations with you. I have failed within my endeavor of trying to put a label on the kind of coaching you do and the kind of coaching I also do to a certain degree. But if I was to attempt to give a label, that would be a failing attempt. I would call it, as you said, looking for the truth, or quote unquote truth coaching. To me, it seems like it's an endeavor that's going to fail by default. And if it's not going to fail, something extremely significant will have happened. But the simple process of looking for it is in and of itself worthwhile. And I know you could argue that anything is worthwhile, and I would agree with that. But the simple seeking itself, the simple looking for it is really special to me. And you can answer to this if you want, or you can just not answer. It's simply an observation that I made.
Well, just to the nature of like coaching as a thing, nobody's looking for the truth, right? People are looking to generally fix something that they perceive as broken. I think it's okay to let people know that you can help them with that without further thingifying that. So if somebody said, having a really hard time with my wife, we're thinking about getting divorced. I'd like to not get divorced. You can very much, I would very much say now, yeah, I'd love to help you with that. And so in their mind, it's that that's getting fixed. We're going to look in this direction, and then that wife, that divorce, that whatever is going to look completely different to them. And they might still get divorced. I don't know. I don't have control of these things, nor do I want to, drive this bus that we call, the world. But I do know for sure that it will look different to them. And as people see things differently, situations shift. And I know this because, working with a bunch of executives, mostly on fixing, in quotes, their business problems, we fix those. But many times people have told me afterwards that they have better relationships with their partners or their kids, that they've quit addictive or abusive behaviors. They sleep a lot better, stuff like that. And those are things we never talked about. So I know that as you see the world differently, life is going to exist differently for you. But I would never, we're talking at a fairly deep level here, and I'm only going 70% of the way there, so to not make this a really weird conversation, right? But some people, like I said, can only go 1% of the way there, right? Some people, you could you just poke a little pinhole in that studio set that we were talking about, and that's all that they can handle, right? All that they can handle is maybe a slightly different technique of when your wife yells at you, wait 5 seconds. Maybe that's all they can possibly consume at this moment. Is that truth? No, but it's a step in slowing down, right? And you can't do much if your mind is going 1,000,000 miles an hour. So the technique, if you want, that I use with people, it's not like I just have this weird high-level spiritual conversation with everybody all the time. I try to get there as quickly as we can. But sometimes people need, if somebody came into the emergency room with having a heart attack, you're not like, well, you're kind of overweight. Let's talk about eating more organic foods. No, you restart their heart and you do all that stuff. And then that's okay. There's no harm in that, and not being a purist, if you will, right? There's no harm in that. In fact, there's a beauty to it. But pretty quickly, you don't want to just keep restarting their heart. Pretty quickly, you got to get to let's go upstream here and figure out what's the problem. And so for us, the upstream is seeing how thought really works, seeing who you really are, seeing that life is taking care of life. And it's different for different people. Somebody who's who's an atheist, like they're very stuck on that. Well, I'm not going to talk to them about God because that's just going to light up all their flares and they're going to go running in the other direction. So that's not helpful. Even if I see that as truth, but it's not helpful. So coaching is like, you can't just smack somebody with truth, and if they don't get it, well, like, screw them, right? I mean, it's a mixture of, not a mixture, but like you're trying to help somebody, and different people need different kinds of help. Still all looking in the same direction, but the techniques, if you would, can be different. That said, I don't use techniques of like that look away from the truth, right? Like, well, why don't you just, get up earlier and work an extra hour? That, maybe that would solve your problems. Like that's going away from it, if that makes sense. And hearing everything that I just said, it's all bullshit because none of this exists, right? Coaching it's a thing, it's an idea. But in this world that you and I live in, where we can have a conversation on the computer, over the internet, in this world we live in, we're trying to live better lives or see something different. Yeah, we do some coaching, and that's the flavor of coaching that I like. But seeing the bullshit of it all too makes me a bit more lighthearted about it, and makes me not denigrate other coaches that I think do it, I thought did it wrong or were doing people a disservice. Because I did think that for a long time, but now it's like, no, it's all just part of everything, and it's only wrong because it exists here. The same thing, right? Like, in the same way that I made the thing about the guy whose wife yelled at him. Well, I listened to, I'm not going to name names, but, some giant coach standing on a big stage with 20,000 people and shouting at them. And in my head, I make a picture of like, what an idiot. But it's the same exact thing I was talking about with the guy and his wife. It's all happening here. It's always, and pointing to my head if you're listening to this, that's the only place it happened. It didn't happen on stage. And the same is true of Trump or anybody else you listen to on a big stage. It's the same thing. What's really cool about this conversation, I gotta say, is obviously I have strong opinions on all this stuff and fairly well-developed opinions, but still, just in this past hour and a bit, like, I'm hearing new things for myself, right? Like my own bullshit is fading a bit. Like, I'm seeing the world differently just by hearing myself talk or hearing your questions, or really wanting to make sure that I'm giving an honest answer. I can hear myself in the back of my head as I'm talking thinking, wait, is that actually really true, or is that just something that you believed for a long time? Because I really, I want to give you and your audience something truthful, if you will, or as close to truth as possible. I'm thinking about it, and then thinking about it, I'm like, no, that's not really, no, don't say that. That's not actually true. That's just one of Knopf's ideas. So it's interesting how the many ways in which the world can look different to us. You can go sit in the woods for an hour, the world will look different to you. You don't need a coach, that's for sure.
I'm really tempted into going into a specific direction.
Go.
Okay, I will do it. Fair enough. It seems to me that there are several types of coaching. And as you mentioned earlier, I would like to say that at the end, we're all playing a game. What do you make of what I would call the dichotomy between commitment and desire? And I'm going to add more context to this specific question. And that is, we both know a friend that went somewhat recently to get coaching from a coach that we both know, and spent a significant sum of money on that endeavor. And the coaching method that coach was utilizing seemed to me, and I'm definitely going to get it false, but my perception of it was that it was very much a commitment-based coaching, as in, this is the kind of persona that you are committing on being, and you need to read this every morning and every night and know it by memory, and you need to continuously remind yourself of this persona. And I think both of us at the beginning, we were very puzzled by that perspective, and I think at least speaking for me, I kind of found it quite amusing and interesting to look into. However, after actually looking into it, I felt like there was a lack of sincerity and almost humanity within that sort of approach. What do you make of that sort of dichotomy?
Well, let's put the desire slash commitment dichotomy aside for a minute, because I don't really see that as a dichotomy. But I will talk about this coach and the commitment thing and all that. If you look at the NFL, National Football League in America, or any professional sports team, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to pick that one. And you've got all the different coaches of all the different teams. They all have very different styles, right? Some are very militant. Some are very, kind. Some are very team-oriented. Some are very individual-oriented. Some are very, yell at people, denigrate them, beat them down. And some are the opposite, whatever it is. And you might say, well, all that really matters in the end is who wins the games, right? And the best coach, you can't evaluate a coach like these sports coaches based on anything other than what wins the games. If they win the games, they're a good coach by definition. And that's a fair statement at a certain level, right? And certainly that's what would get them more money and get hired by the better teams and so on and so forth. And the players would appreciate that. So if we want to live in that world where results are the only thing that matters, then I would look at this coach or many others that you're talking about and say, like, okay, well, are his clients doing better things in the world? Are they, making more money? Are they upgrading their relationships? Are they not getting divorced? Are they whatever, achieving their goals? And if they are, then by definition, he's a good coach. But if we want to look at the world through a different lens, then I would say that it's just, it's like upgrading your ego. It's just an ego 2.0. It's a better version of the ego. And I think the direction that I'm looking, and many, 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 many other coaches and spiritual people and so forth, and I say that because you've been very kind to me here and saying that, I'm somewhat unique, but that's not true at all. There's plenty of people pointing in this direction of like seeing the ego for what it is. It's just the ego. It's just this idea we have of ourselves that doesn't need upgrading. It doesn't need downgrading. We need to see that we are not our ego. Admittedly, when our friend went to see him and afterwards, I had such this horrible kind of taste in my mouth, like hearing about his experiences and feeling like, that's just like gross. And it was not just conceptually, just, gross. But now I see it much more like, as I was saying, there are no others, whereas before I would see, like Trump as like the evil one, the horrible, ugly, gross, lying, whatever dude. I just don't see that much anymore, And so in the same way, I don't see this other coach as weird, bad, doing it the wrong way, whatever. I don't see much wrong with the world anymore. It's not to say that it's like right or whatever. It just sort of is. It's just sort of neutral. If that, I don't, that's kind of a silly expression. It is what it is, but it's true. It's just sort of neutral. It's an activity happening. It's an activity of mind, and that's okay. Like I don't get upset about fish swimming upstream, even though it looks really stupid, right? Like, I don't get upset about him teaching what he teaches, because who am I to say that like that's wrong or that's dumb or whatever? The idea that what I'm teaching is right is ego as well. It feels less like that, but maybe that's the nature of the ego. It's like it feel like what our opinions feel more right. And you have a lot of coaches that really don't practice what they preach, and that's the number one thing for me. And trust me, I don't get it right a lot of the time, but it's the thing that is most important to me about coaching is like when I on my own free time, if you will, when I'm learning more about coaching, it's not learning about methods or getting certifications. It's like, am I really seeing the world, like just life? The world is something different. But am I seeing life in the way that I coach about it? Am I living in a place where I don't think a lot about what decisions to make? I let life flow a lot more. Am I actually doing that, or is that just like an idea that I tell other people to do? But when it comes to my life, like, no, I really need to be organized and make plans and so forth. So that's where I call myself on things, and really try to be. It's like subtractive, right? That's a really good word, subtractive. So like this example I just gave, planning. Right? I tried to plan less and less, and it's certainly something I talk with people about, not as a technique, but as let life flow, let life show you what needs to happen in the next step. And I don't do it 100% of the time. Sometimes it looks like I need to make a plan, but as I do, I say like, all right, well, could you let go of it a little bit? Could you make less of a plan, or could you just not make a plan and trust? And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, and all of that's okay too. That's all humaning, right? I buy insurance sometimes, even though I know that I'll be okay without it. But I can say that, I recently found a new coach. She's just sort of light years ahead of me on this stuff. And for myself, even though I feel fairly immersed in this and have for a while, just since I've met her, maybe a month ago now, just looking in this direction even more with more intensity, if you will, realizing that I need to make even fewer plans than I did, realizing how well orchestrated life is already, even when it looks like it's not. I'm even lighter and happier than I ever have been. And I thought I was really, really, really light and happy, but she didn't do anything. She didn't tell me any technique. She didn't tell me to stop doing anything or start doing anything. We just really discuss that sort of truth stuff, the real nature of life. And all of a sudden, I said subtractive is a good word. That's it. Like, things just start falling off of me, and you feel lighter. You feel happier. You don't feel like you need to do as much. And as you sort of joked at the beginning of the conversation, what do you know? You achieve your goals just the same.
I feel like this might be a bit of a curveball question, but I would like to ask it anyway. What would you say makes someone great at what they do? What makes greatness? And if you'd like me to expand, think
Sure.
Michael Jordan. Think maybe an example that I actually like a lot more is someone like Marcus Aurelius. In case you don't know the story of Marcus Aurelius, is an ex-emperor of Rome. He's one of the only emperors that got chosen instead of becoming emperor because of family and being the son of the emperor. He actually got chosen. He's known for having written his thoughts down almost every night, and then we ended up actually finding those thoughts, and that ended up becoming a book called Meditations. And he's known for having been, I would say, it's pretty fair to say he was probably the greatest emperor that Rome has ever had, mainly because he exercised qualities of humility, seriousness, and leadership. And mainly, I would say, a lack of ego that a lot of emperors and a lot of people in power, especially in the past, have used to exercise. When you look at someone that historically was the most powerful man in the world and yet still managed to be somehow extremely humble and not allow ego to take over himself, how does that happen? What do you think is the nature of someone like that? How does someone like that get, pardon my term, created?
So first, let's say that your entire question is about the world of form, right? We're talking about people who are good at their jobs, so to speak, that are humans. And the rest of the conversation, not all of it, but we've been pointing more towards, and maybe I didn't say this very clearly, but more towards the formless, like who are we beyond our bodies? Right? Beyond our brains and our bodies and these ideas we have of ourselves, like I'm a man, this religion, I'm, this job, this whatever. Who are we beyond that, right? That we are spirit. So this question is very much a question of form, like what makes somebody a good basketball player or a good leader, good whatever. I just want to make that distinction first because I think it's an important one. That said, I would like to believe that what people like Marcus Aurelius had, or some famous artists, or like Vincent van Gogh or Da Vinci, was the ability to see beyond themselves, right? To see, I think Marcus Aurelius saw the nature of thought, right? Saw that thinking is just thinking. Thinking it's not a representation of who you are. It's just something that comes to you. We all have tens, hundreds of thousands of thoughts that pop in our head all day. They're not us. They're just thoughts. And I think that that's something that he saw fairly clearly. So I don't know. I mean, I have no evidence for this. I have nothing. But my hunch would be that to the degree that people are able to connect more with who they really are, connect more with the divine, to receive messages from beyond themselves, from beyond their brain, whether through meditation or some other way, those people tend in our society to perform better, if you will. Is that the case with Michael Jordan? I have no idea. I really have no idea. Is there something to practicing and commitment and all of that to make a Michael Jordan? Yeah, for sure. Is there also like natural talent and all that? Yeah, for sure. But, you have people now of all walks of life talking about meditation, even like professional basketball players and stuff. And it's just a way, it is a method. You don't need it, but it's a pretty good method for getting beyond yourself, getting outside of your own body, getting outside of this idea that I'm pointing to myself here, is me, that I am not, I am, a white guy, like whatever. Getting outside of that, seeing that like, no, I'm spirit in the same way that you are spirit, in the same way that, a tree is spirit, the same way that this coffee cup is spirit. So, so it's weird that I think that maybe greatness is sometimes probably just hard work, right? You can get pretty far with hard work. You can get really far with hard work and dedication and commitment and waking up early and all those things. So maybe in the case of Michael Jordan or some of these other people you mentioned, or some other famous people, or that we know or don't know, or maybe just the guy down the street who, made $1 million overnight. Yeah, maybe that's all it was hard work. I don't know. But I'd like to think that it's the ability to connect to something that's not what you define as you. And we all do it, whether we consciously do it or not. Like I said, we all have those brainstorm moments in the shower where like a great idea comes to us. We didn't do that. That wasn't the result of hard work. Right? That was the result of often having a good night's sleep, being in hot water, primal, or kind of a primal state, not having a lot on our mind because it's the first thing in the morning. And, good ideas come to us, often which can be very lucrative. So we all do it, even if we don't think of it in a godly sort of way. And we certainly all have the capacity for it.
When I think of the two people I mentioned, Michael Jordan and Marcus Aurelius, in some way, the two of them feel very different in my mind. And the reason for it is because it feels like one, Michael, somehow mastered the art of playing basketball and geared everything and had this insatiable desire to be the best. While Marcus Aurelius, pardon my term, because that's not what I'm trying to say, but it's pointing towards that direction, and that seems like a more complete example of greatness, because the performance was not in being the best at what he was doing. It was really a more encompassing craft of life, and really a lifelong endeavor of being the best emperor possible, but more from a perspective of really keeping himself in check and being as clear-minded as possible. I know this is a bit of a tangent, and I'm not entirely sure of what to make of this. However, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or perspective on what I just said, and if you don't, that's totally fine.
I mean, at some level, for you to be right, we have to evaluate these people, right? Like say, okay, Marcus Aurelius was really good at these things. And maybe you have a different leader who was really good at some things, but he had a horrible home life. and he was, he was a great leader, except that he, went to war with this other country and he killed a bunch of people. So like that's not great. And so we always are making a scorecard for everybody, or somebody was great, the best athlete ever, but he cheated on his wife, so he's not a good person. And we're always making these scorecards. And so if we're looking at like who's a great person and what makes them great, well, first of all, we have to come up with this report card. And isn't it silly, the metrics that we use to do that? All of them completely ego-based, right? And all of them, I mean, they're based in ego in general, but also in our personal ego, right? Of our individual belief systems of like what's right and wrong, good and bad. And so we give them a label. Okay, and finally you've got this like, saintly person somewhere in the world that, did no wrong and only did great things, blah, blah. And even the whole world agrees somehow that this person was amazing. We're still just looking at what he did or didn't do or she, that was amazing. And trying to evaluate, how did he get there? I don't know. It seems sort of like, I don't know. It just, as I'm thinking about it, it all just seems very humorous to me. This idea of elevating anybody, that's it. Elevating any other human to a superstar level and not seeing that you are that and way beyond that it seems silly. It just seems silly. I did it before too, so like I'm not picking on you. I mentioned, like Nelson Mandela or something, right? As this like esteemed kind of person. But it's silly. It's silly because we are all that. Each one of us, every one of us, even though we're not separate, every one of us is all of that. Right? We're all just like drops of water in the ocean, right? We're not separate. There's no bigger drops and littler drops. It's all just one from.
That is definitely something that I do from time to time. And although I do it, that's not a bad thing. And the fact that I do it is not a bad thing.
At least to realize it's a game. Yeah.
The awareness of realizing that it's a game and that something kind of fun is happening is always extremely useful. Whatever. Even useful, it's not a word I like very much, but it's enlightening. Put it that way.
What were you hoping, if anything, that your audience, whoever listens to this, my audience, whatever, would get out of this, the whole conversation?
I have a few answers that come to mind. One answer, and these answers are directly, you could say they are a bit of paradox because they go against each other. One answer that comes to mind is I was not hoping they would get anything, simply because I didn't come from the place of I hope that they understand this or that. I suppose that the one thing that is the intention for the conversation is really the possibility of any unnamed resonation happening within someone. And I suppose upon further examination, my hope would be that that unknown resonation would eventually lead them somewhere on their own path.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let me just say how I would sum up what you just said was like getting somewhere by seeing there's nowhere to get. That's kind of what I would hope people would get out of this conversation.
I feel like that's such a beautiful gift. And I would specifically call it a gift. That it's not like you gave it. It's not you giving it. But nonetheless, it feels like a gift.
It's been a huge gift to me from wherever I got it from, which was from, friends, coaches, experience, life itself. Just seeing it more and more, it's been a huge gift. But I didn't do it, so it's a gift.
You recently suggested that I read a book called The Disappearance of the Universe, and I've been listening to it in my car as I'm driving, and I found it extremely interesting. But I'm still very much early within the book. And one thing I should say before I ask the question is anytime that you send me something, I get really excited, especially if your wording is like, you should read this or like something along those lines. Because I'm like, yes, okay, there is something to explore. I'm curious to learn, what did the book give you? And I understand that there might be a bit of a issue when it comes to spoilers. So you can just like tell me your perspective. You don't need to necessarily get into the depths of the book itself. I'm just curious, what made you have that sort of emotional reaction of sending someone like me the book and saying, hey, like, read this is awesome?
It points to truth more than any other book I've ever read. And in a way, the method, the sort of literary devices of the book, if you will, I don't want to give away the spoiler alert either, but like the literary devices of the book do that in a way that just hits you in a sort of undeniable way. It's out there. You have to kind of be ready for it. I wouldn't have been ready for this book even probably 6 months or a year ago, which is to not say that, you know, there's a level that you have to get to before you read this book. That's certainly not true. But by ready, I mean, you have to be quite willing to see something new, to see something different than what you already know. So yeah, it's a book that I'd strongly recommend really to anybody at any sort of level of development, whatever you want to call that. Just with the caveat that, like, you know, sit down, put your seatbelt on, and get ready for a crazy ride. But it's a fun ride. It's not scary. It's not threatening. It's not gonna tell you to quit your job or anything like that. It's different. It's different. So I've been suggesting this left and right to people.
Well, thank you. I'm honored you would think of me when it comes to your suggestions.
Yeah.
And thank you for this great conversation.
It was awesome.
Thank you. I agree.
Oh no, I mean, it was. There's not a lot of people that I would say, sure, to like, let's have a 2-hour conversation about nothing and record it. But with you, you know, it's always a lot of fun. So, oh, well, here, now that you mention it, and now that we talked about that, to your last question about your previous question about greatness, I think what makes a lot of people great, if we look at athletes or artists or something like that, is, and athletics is such a good example because of the word play, right? They go and play a game, but that's it, it's play. Doesn't mean that it isn't strenuous, but it's not hard work because it's play. You know, the same way that they loved playing football or whatever with their buddies when they were growing up, and loved playing football in high school and loved playing football in college. And that's all you want to do, right? It's just like, you just, that's all you want to do. You love it so much. And again, it doesn't mean there's not hard work and injuries and dedication and all that, but you're playing. What's better than playing? And to me, as humans, the humans that seem to do really well are people that, like I said, love what they're doing. We also have to be careful, though, to measure doing well by any external measure, right? Like, there are many of artists who live a wonderful life, even though they don't make a lot of money, or even though we might judge that they still live at home, or they can't afford insurance, or whatever it is. But they live a wonderful life because, you know, in their mind, they're happy. They're living a wonderful life. They're free. And that's not to say that becoming an artist is a way to freedom. That's not it. It's or even doing the job you love. And I'm not saying one causes the other or vice versa, but I think there is an interplay between them. And I think many of us, myself included, many times take life too seriously and don't realize that it's a game, that it's just something to play at or play with. And I think that's one reason why a lot of people enjoy being around children. It's like, because you can kind of just be yourself around them. There's no goal. You sit and you draw a picture. Doesn't matter how good or bad the picture is. There's nothing to get to. You build Legos. you know that 10 minutes later you're destroying them. You just go run around, you laugh, you tickle, you whatever. There's nothing to achieve. You're just playing. And I think that that's something that I'm trying to see more and more about life, is that there is nothing to achieve. If you want to achieve something, that's okay. There's no harm in it either, but there's no inherent benefit. Be happy. It's my only, I know it's a trite thing to end on, but again, this conversation has been for me as much as for your audience. And so I'm telling myself as much as anybody else, be happy.
One instinctual reaction I had a moment ago was that I'm going to enjoy re-listening to this conversation several times.
Nice. Edit it down to like 15 minutes will be good.
Yes. And at the same time, it's also quite useful for me, because I resonate, just like the viewer that I was talking about that might resonate with it. I do resonate with it myself, and so I find it, especially specific moments of this conversation, to be very much binge-worthy. And binge-worthy is a bad term, but binge-worthy in the sense that it's useful to go back to it. So thank you for it. I deeply,
it's been most fun.
it.
It's been very playful, as I said. Yeah. No, pleasure. Anytime. Literally anytime.
I'm sure we're gonna do this again. Is there any
conversation?
Is there conversation 1, nothingness part 2? Is there any place where you would like to send people to? Books, Humans Working, or your website, or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't want to I have no program or anything to promote, but if you're interested in sort of just hearing more, or, potentially working together or anything like that, just having a conversation like this. I mean, this is how my sales conversations go, to give you an idea, right? They're not 2 hours, but just sort of discussing the nature of life and seeing if that resonates, right? And
sometimes sales conversations are 2 hours, as we can learn from our
that's
experience.
true also. Yeah. So my email, it's naf at humansworking.co, humansworking.co, NAF at HUMANSWORKING.co.
Alrighty. Thank you for this.
Take care, my friend.